Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm tackling yet another Rotted request, this time coming from patron Ben Grimm, who wanted me to watch and review the 2018 movie Nekrotronic. Ben says of Nekrotronic, it's like a mix of Ghostbusters, The Matrix, and a little bit of Pulse in there. Plus, it's an Aussie flick starring Ben O'Toole from Bloody Hell, which we both enjoyed. Keep an eye out for the Santa hat scene. The Santa hat scene basically being the reasoning for including it in the Christmas horror movie review lineup, but cards on the table, I spent a good portion of December under the weather, and I wasn't able to get to this one until now. That Santa scene was supposed to have been the tenuous tie that made it a Christmas horror movie. I've certainly reviewed movies with less ties than that, but yeah, it just didn't pan out that way. Nevertheless, I am at the very least getting to it by the end of December. And yes, it is indeed a movie from Australia, written and directed by Kaya Roche-Turner and also written by Tristan Roche-Turner. This is a bit of an odd duck. I think Ben kind of nailed it in his description as far as in needing to describe what this movie is or the reasoning to watch it, coming up with a list of other films that remind him of Nekrotronic. Because honestly, that's the best way I could describe it, is just coming up with a laundry list of movies that this plucks and pulls from to ultimately come up with the feature that it is. Yes, and starring Ben O'Toole as our lead character of Howard North. I did love Ben O'Toole in Bloody Hell. Ben Grimm and I share that love. It was one of our top movies of the year it came out, and to this day is one of my kind of hidden gem recommendations. And in Nekrotronic, Ben O'Toole's character of Howard North plays a septic tank maintenance man who's pretty down on his luck, as I would imagine a lot of septic tank maintenance men are. He works alongside his bumbling cohort, who is constantly entranced by his phone, watching videos and just generally being tuned out to the world, until he finds himself getting kind of caught up in this new game that prompts him to get downloaded, in which through an augmented reality app kind of thing allows him to find and battle ghosts. What neither of them realize is that the ghosts in this game are actual ghosts and that there are demons that are living in this world, and this app was created with the specific purpose of allowing these demons to run free. So they're kind of operating in a veil-lifted world under our world-esque situation, and Howard gets drawn into things even further by finding out he has some sort of prophetic birthright to a band of demon hunters as old as the hills. I watched Nekrotronic a few weeks ago, and I've been spending that time ever since kind of trying to figure out what to say about it. And I guess the best way I can really describe it is an entertaining mess. Like I said, I mean, the best way to really describe Nekrotronic is to describe other movies that it picked and pulled from. Ben mentioned Ghostbusters, The Matrix, a little bit of Pulse. I picked up Shaun of the Dead, a bunch of others that just kind of wind up not necessarily being plagiarized, but at what point does inspiration go so far that it just winds up being an integral part of the story? I remember watching an interview with Peter Weller where he's describing how every art is replicant in some way or another of another piece of art, that movies draw from paintings, that paintings draw all the way back to cave drawings, and eventually we kind of do wind up in a place of just continual borrowing and almost a incestual relationship with generations of art that has come before. But sometimes it just seems odd. And with Nekrotronic, I really just kind of got the sense that this wasn't a movie of its own right, but more just a casserole made up of other movies that just kind of got slung together haphazardly from leftovers in the fridge. This wasn't a meal that was intricately made with compounding and contrasting flavors. It was just a mishmash. An entertaining mishmash, sure, but a mishmash nonetheless. I had a lot of trouble getting into this one, I'm not gonna lie. There were certain aspects of it that were entertaining and were fun. The visuals were a wild romp, a combination of CG and practical effects and so forth that kind of worked fairly well, and there were just plenty of them. This was a very visual spectacle, but as far as the storyline and the characters themselves go, it just kind of wound up in a place of almost horror superhero mediocrity. And that mediocrity would have been just fine. I don't mind it, certainly. But there was one aspect of this film in particular that really did drag it down for me, and that was the character of Rangi, who is Howard's cohort, co-worker that kind of gets drug into things. Him, God, how best to describe Rangi? The nature of him being continually attached to his phone and always blissfully tuned out to the world around him made for a couple of funny scenes, but for the most part, it just wound up in an area of frustration. And that was almost the point of the character, was to continually cause disruption and frustration on the part of Howard. And I think that was the thing that kind of drew me out of the movie, is that there is only so far that we can go with a character that is completely clueless and does everything in his power to continually trip up the main character and find himself in a place of almost being the antagonist by applying absolutely zero thought whatsoever to any of his actions and continually becoming a storyline and plot device roadblock for our main character. And at some point, the frustrations that Howard feels towards the Rangi character and all the trip ups that he causes does translate through the screen and causes the audience to become frustrated. And that's what happened to me. Maybe that's where I got a little bit of the Shaun of the Dead thing, was Nick Frost's character in Shaun of the Dead was a delightful oaf, but he also was a bit of a stumbling roadblock in Shaun's progress as a character, which worked well for the movie. But it walked a fine line, and I would almost dare say that towards the end kind of tripped on that line just a bit, as far as how far down he is able to drag the main character before the audience starts to get frustrated too. Rangi from Nekrotronic, at least in the first half of the movie, proves to just completely obliterate that line and is nothing more than an absolute millstone around the neck of our main character. The only other real main issue that I had with Nekrotronic was almost a pro and a con at the same time. This was a movie that was just absolutely cram-packed with world building. Tools, gadgets, rules, characters, backstory, generational prophecy, all sorts of really intricate stuff, which is fine. It's great even, but when we are following a protagonist that is outside of this circle and is getting introduced to all of these concepts, a lot of this movie is just spent explaining things. These are what these rules are. These are what these characters are. This is what your prophecy is. This is what this gadget does. You got to wear this suit or this bad thing will happen to you, and so on and so forth. It's just a whole lot of exposition and a whole lot of explanation. And just like Shaun of the Dead tread that previous sin fairly delicately while Nekrotronic stomped all over it, so too does this happen with the world building elements, and it kind of reminded me of The Matrix, how a lot of it was bringing Neo and so forth on board and explaining a whole lot to him, but it did manage to tread that line fairly carefully and provide a level of exposition and world building to the audience while at the same time continuing to move the story forward and providing genuine surprises for everybody. In the way that The Matrix was gentle about it, again, Nekrotronic stomps all over it and simply provides, this is what this is, this is what this is, this is what this is, and doesn't mind stalling out the plot at any given moment to continually stop, pause, let's explain this, now go again. Look, I don't want to give the wrong impression here. I did enjoy this movie. Like I said, it is entertaining. And sometimes entertaining is just fine. This is little more than popcorn fare for me. And in that regard, I'm very glad that Ben Grimm recommended it to me and that I did watch it. And in that regard, I do recommend it. But I think that this really could have been a whole lot more, and it could have been a whole lot more with just kind of treating some of the source material that it pulled from with a little bit more reverence, learning not just what they did, but how and why they did what they did, and use that as lessons moving forward for creating its own plot and its own story and its own characters. Instead, it just kind of pulled from the elements that it liked and hoped that it would kind of all come together in a uniform film, and I'm sorry to say, for me, that just wasn't the case. Nevertheless, if you are in the mood for something mindless, fun, entertaining, and a massive visual spectacle, I could think of a whole lot worse ways than to spend your evening with Nekrotronic. So thank you very much for joining me on this video review. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click like and subscribe. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.